We'll break down the Red Wings prospects pool on today's show. We'll talk about their draft, we'll talk about their prospect pool outlook, and their season expectations, all coming up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalakesh, Director of North American Scouting for Dauber Prospects, usually joined by Sebastian High, who again couldn't make it for this week. And on today's show, we'll be talking about the Red Wings prospect pool in detail. In the first segment, we'll focus on their 2024 NHL draft, look at each pick in isolation, and give them a grade for the 2024 draft class. Then after that, in our second segment, we'll look at their outlook for the prospect pool in general, which key prospects they have in which positions, and also give them a grade for the prospect pool as well. And finally, in our third segment, we'll look at their expectations and projections for 2024-25, specifically related to prospects, but we'll also talk about whether or not the Red Wings will make the playoffs. So we've got a bunch of covered today. Let's get right into it. But just before, this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe, leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get started right away here with the first selection of the 2024 NHL draft for the Detroit Red Wings. And it's a player that they have in abundance in their system already with their two former first-round picks for the past 2 years being basically the same player in a different font. They selected Michael Brandsegg-Nygård here at 15th overall in the 2024 draft. He's a 6'1", 200-pound right winger who played in the Allsvenskan this entire past season. He's Norwegian-born, played for Norway both at the World Juniors and at the World Championships at the men's level. Overall, I like his skill set. I love the fact that he's a highly intelligent, defensively responsible, intense winger who one of a few players that I thought could have played a game or two on a fourth line in the NHL this past season. Really mature, again, really defensively responsible. He's an intense forechecker who loves to apply a hard pressure on players, push him into mistakes, especially when he's forechecking on defenders. Really good on retrievals as well. He can retrieve dump-ins really well and kind of spin off pressure, find an outlet. And I think in the first half of the season, a lot of people were concerned with the lack of production and didn't really see any offensive upside, but it was clear the entire time that Michael Brandsegg-Nygård, or MBN as Sebastian and I refer him to, is a really good goal scorer. He loves to shoot, and he's comfortable doing it in motion. He's comfortable shooting from the half wall with one-timers on the power play. His shooting mechanics, especially on those one-timers, is really refined. He's got a heavy, accurate release. He can pick corners in transition. He's got a really good goal-scoring toolkit. You know, his offensive game isn't a knock necessarily, but like I said, they have two of this type of player already in the system in Marco Kasper and Nate Daniels, so we'll get it to them in the second segment. But just to summarize, you know, they have this type of player. I would have loved to see them go a different route in terms of maybe adding someone with true bona fide top six upside as a forward. But Michael Brandsegg-Nygård for me just screams middle six winger. He just has everything that he needs to have as a middle six defensive winger in order to make it to the NHL. And I think he could play NHL games this season if it wasn't for the fact that that Detroit already loaned him out. I think he would have been able to stick around on a fourth line, but I think it's best for his development to go back to Sweden. Let's move right on to the 47th pick, which is the next selection from the Detroit Red Wings, and it was Max Plant. And in this pick, they went a whole different direction than Michael Brandsegg-Nygård. They went for an offensive, kind of undersized winger who's played some time at center, but I see him projecting more as a winger. He's a fast-paced, dynamic player who loves to make passes to the slot. That's the main thing he excels at, is throwing everything at the slot and seeing what happens. I love that aspect of his toolkit overall. I think he's a great playmaker with a really smart passing game. But at the same time, you want to see a bit more kind of progressive passes rather than a player who tries to throw everything at the slot, because it doesn't really matter what's going on around Max Plant. He's going to try to find someone in the slot for a shot. And he's able to shoot as well. He's a great skater, great hands. But overall, it's really the playmaking that's going to be his bread and butter. I think the thing he's going to need to develop over the next few years is that ability to make low to high passes, kind of progressive passes that keep cycles alive, that keep plays alive, rather than try to go for the high danger chance every time, because that's not a style of play that really translates well in the NHL. Let's move right on to number 80 in the 2024 NHL draft. The third selection of the Detroit Red Wings was Andre Becker. He's a 6'1", 184-pound center. He was an overager who exploded offensively in Prince George when surrounded by better talent than he was before. And my goodness, was he interesting to watch this year. I was certain he was going to get drafted in the top 100. I thought, for sure a team's going to take a swing on this guy, because he's a fantastic playmaker, really, really smart. He's an intense forechecker. He's able to handle himself physically. Becker was really kind of the bread and butter of Prince George's kind of second line. Sometimes he played on the top line as well. He was a key offensive contributor for them, while also being a guy they could trust with penalty killing minutes, with power play minutes, with defensive zone faceoffs. He's got a really complete offensive toolkit, and it took him some time to figure it out. He's 20 right now. A lot of prospects show these flashes earlier on. Becker didn't get drafted the first year he was eligible, and here he is now at 80th overall to the Detroit Red Wings. So it's a great story, and I'm interested to see how that kind of follows up as we move forward. We've also got a goalie here that was selected with their fourth selection at 126th overall. The Red Wings went with Landon Miller of the Sioux Greyhounds. He's a 6'4" goalie who played 30 games this past season, put up a 2.79 goals against average and an 889 save percentage with the Greyhounds. So not really impressive numbers. And honestly, I don't really have many notes on Landon Miller, mainly because I didn't have many reasons to watch the Sioux. But in the games that I watched in passing, where I was watching another team or another player and he was playing in goal, he didn't really necessarily stand out to me as a goalie that should be drafted in the top 150. Much less with a fourth round selection. Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of goalies available that I would have gone for instead. Ryan St-Leanders, Marcus Goodloff, or a couple of goalies that I had ranked fairly highly, that I would have gone for instead. But they clearly see something with Landon Miller. I think it has to do with the size. As we've mentioned before on the podcast, a lot of scouts have this mindset of, get me a 6'4" plus goalie, and we'll have our development team work on him and try to develop something out of him. I don't know if that's going to work out for Landon Miller, but he's definitely a swing. Let's move right on to John Whipple, who's a prospect that got a lot of looks on as he played in the NTDP this past season. He's a left shot defenseman, 6'1". They picked him up at 144th overall, and he plays a really simple game. He's a good skater and a good defenseman, mainly pushes plays to the outside off the rush. He's pretty good at throwing his body around in those situations, kind of suffocating rushes that way. He's aggressive in front of his net. He's really looking to box out players and kind of push him out of the crease in front of his goalie to clear his goalie's eyes. So a really efficient, really simple player. I don't really see much, if any, offense from him that's going to be coming down the line. He doesn't really show any flashes of intelligent breakout passing or offensive zone play. He doesn't really fake his way out of problems. He doesn't really look off his passes. He gets the first option he sees. So pretty limited, but there's something to work with there. Move right on to Charlie Forsland, who was the 176th overall pick, and he's a prospect I would keep a lookout for. He was playing in a kind of lower end program in Falu in Hockey Etan and in the J20 division. It's called the J20 Division 1, but it's under the elite division of J20, so it's technically the second division. I know it's confusing, but yeah, he's really interesting. 6'2", 201 pounds. He was a point per game in the Hockey Ettan, which is the third division of pro hockey in Sweden. So he played 19 games against men, went exactly a point per game in that league. He's a prospect I'd look out for. He's a good scorer with some power forward elements, and the Red Wings have had a good history with Swedish forwards drafted out of kind of obscure programs, kind of unearthing talents from those leagues and those levels. So I would keep a lookout definitely for Charlie Forsland. It could be something really interesting. They also added 2 7th-round picks. They have Austin Baker here at 203rd overall. He's a left wing who also played in the NTDP. So they added 3 NTDP players in this draft: Plant, Whipple, and Baker. And Baker's really a complementary forward at his best. He's a player who will be hard on the forecheck, will hit, who's going to kind of turn pucks over down low and try to do something with them. I don't really see much in terms of offensive skill outside of a decent scoring touch. But his skill level, I don't think, is nearly good enough in order to make him a second line or a first line forward at the pro level, at any level, really. But he's got a shot at being a guy who's going to get a cup of coffee, 100 games, something like that in his career. I wouldn't be surprised. And lastly, we have Fisher Scott, who's an overager, 6'2", 280 pounds. He went half a point a game in the USHL. He's a decent puck mover, but I don't see much more outside of that moves the needle. I don't really see an NHLer here, but it's a 7th-round pick. You go for a player who has a specific skill set. In Fisher's case, it's the puck moving ability, and you see if he can develop a game around that. Now, overall, I'd give this draft a C plus. There aren't, from the first round onwards, I don't really see many selections that really excite me. I think it was a bit early to go on Plant. Michael Brandsegg-Nygård, like I said, they have two of that guy in the system. I don't know if I would have gone that direction. Outside of that, the only real pick that gives me promise is Charlie Forsland. Outside of that, it's a pretty average grade, a pretty average draft across the board. So that's my grade for them. Feel free to debate down below and call me an idiot if you need to. That's okay. But that's kind of my assessment of this grade of this draft. Now we're going to move on to our second segment here, where we give an outlook on the overall prospect pool, and this part's a bit more promising for the Red Wings. We'll get into that in just a second, but just before, a quick word from our sponsors at Indeed. We know that hiring is a very difficult thing for employers. You often have to spend hours searching for different candidates, but that's what makes Indeed so good. You don't search, you match. And Indeed is a great matching website, a great matching platform in order to find employees that match exactly what you're looking for your candidates in terms of qualities, in terms of experience, in terms of their skill set. They're exactly what you're looking for there. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. And one of the things that I liked from Indeed as an employee when I got my day job through Indeed was that everything was very clear and very transparent. You knew what the salary grade was in terms of approximates. You knew exactly what they were looking for in terms of skill set, in terms of qualities, and you could look at that as an employee and go, yeah, that matches exactly what I'm looking for. That matches exactly what I'm good at. I can thrive and succeed within this company. And that's exactly what I did. So I can only imagine how much better that is for employers who have to go through multiple candidates and find the right one for them. Indeed just makes things a lot easier across the board. So, listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at indeed.com/locked on. So, just go to indeed.com/locked on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on our podcast. Again, that's indeed.com/locked on. Terms and conditions apply, but if you need to hire, you need Indeed. Alrighty, so let's move right on to our second segment here, where we're going to talk about the Detroit Red Wings overall prospect pool. And like I said, this part's a bit more promising because they added some really interesting pieces in the last few drafts, and I think that definitely has done wonders for their prospect pool overall. The Athletic recently ranked them the second best prospect pool in the NHL, and I would definitely agree that they're up there. So first and foremost, let's talk about the forwards. We'll talk about the big three up top. Michael Brandsegg-Nygård, Marco Casper, and Nate Danielson. Again, these three guys are basically the same player in different fonts. They're all three of them are defensively responsible, mature players who really focus on the defensive game, who are comfortable playing a two-way game where a lot of their puck touches start in the defensive zone because of their impact and because of their deployment. Right, and a lot of D zone faceoffs, a lot of defensive responsibilities. Then they're comfortable turning those defensive puck touches into offensive plays with good transition play where they delegate. Neither one of these three is necessarily an elite skater, so they're not players you can necessarily expect to carry the puck up the ice with good crossovers and solid hands and all that stuff. But they're players who are really good at finding the right pass, delegating the breakout to a player who's a better skater or overall just more skilled in transition, and then positioning themselves off the puck and finding plays in those situations. That's really their specialties. I think it's going to continue to be their specialties as we move forward. Again, these are really three very similar players. I'd say that Brandsegg-Nygård of the three is probably the most, I'd say, intense. Danielson's is the most cerebral of the three, and Marco Casper for me is the most complete and possibly the most offensively gifted of the three. So those are the three kind of glut of players that I'd say are definitely at the top end of the forward core in terms of prospects for the Detroit Red Wings. But you also have some decent options after that. Dmitry Puchelnikov, who went half a point a game in the KHL this past year after being drafted a couple years ago. Max Plant, who we just talked about as well, who was drafted 47th in 2024. You have Red Savage, who was a later pick in 2020, I believe 2021, who's been looking really good as of late. He's really upped his offensive game in the NCAA. He's a defensive specialist for sure. He's a face-off winner, an intense player who puts in work. But Red Savage overall, I still think has taken some decent strides in the past years. And I also think Carter Mazer deserves some recognition. He was drafted 2-3 years ago by the Red Wings in the third round. And he's developed really well in the NCAA. made himself a staple of his team for a long while. And now that he's graduated, he spent his first year in the AHL and went half a point a game as well, I believe. So he's been looking fairly well. We'll talk about him in a second because I've got some interesting thoughts on where he ends up this next year. And obviously, we have Elmer Soderblom, the 6'8" monster who the Red Wings drafted in the seventh round a couple of years ago, who's been looking really, really, really well. He had a cup of coffee in the NHL, gave some nightmares to my Habs. Just made it incredibly difficult for them to play along the boards. He's a physical player, but he's also comfortable using his hands to escape pressure. He's a sneakily skilled and finessed player. With the puck. So I think he's got some interesting skills on his end as well. Some players who I don't think developed as well though in the last couple of years. Amadeus Lombardi kind of had a difficult rookie season in the AHL. The Doer Nilsson brothers haven't really developed the way that they need to. We have Cross Hannes and Dylan James who are kind of in that boat as well, where we haven't seen as much progression from them in the next few years. And Brennan Ollie, who scored I think 14 points in 30 games this past season in the NCAA. I expected him to hit a new level in his freshman season. But he just hasn't hit the level that I expected from him. He wasn't really as impactful as he could have been. So that's the kind of glut of forwards I wanted to talk about here. But let's focus on the defensemen. The defensemen here with the Red Wings are really impressive, and you'll notice there's a lot of Swedes in there. At the top end, the two big names, Simon Edvinsson, who played 25 games this past year, and is setting himself up for a fantastic season this year in 2024-25, is really the marquee prospect. But you also have Axel Sandin Pellikka, who's been playing some decent minutes in the SHL and has played really, really well in his draft +1. He was a very impressive prospect, kind of mobile, shifty, right-handed defenseman who can skate up the ice and make plays. I think that's a type of defenseman that the Red Wings really need in their pool, and I'm really glad they added him where they did. He was my top-ranked defenseman in 2023. I'm a big, big fan of his game, and he's only proven me right since. So I enjoy watching Axel Sandin Pellikka a ton. And you also have William Wallander, who spent the entire season last year, I believe, in the AHL with Grand Rapids. A big guy, 6'4". He played before that with Rögle. I watched Rögle a decent amount in years before due to some other prospects I was looking out for, and Wallander really stood out. He had some top pair minutes on the power play, top pair minutes in the SHL as well, played a decent, reliable game. His offensive game kind of took a step back when he joined Grand Rapids, but I think that's just an adaptation period. As he progresses, I think that the offensive game will continue to grow and get back to Berglund in the SHL. And you also have Anton Johansson, who's another kind of bigger defenseman. He's still progressing right now. He's definitely in the lower end in terms of points, but I'd expect him to get up there fairly soon. And a couple of non-Swedes I wanted to highlight. First and foremost, Shai Buium, who was a key part in Denver winning the national championship in the NCAA this past season. He's reliable, he's safe, he's smart, he's a good puck mover. His brother, Zeev Buium, was just drafted at 12th overall by the Minnesota Wild. They traded up to get him, and thank goodness they did. He should not have slipped to 12th. He was a top 5 pick in my opinion, a fantastic prospect. Shai Buium isn't on that level, but he was a big reason that Zeev was able to progress the way he did. He was kind of a shoulder to rely on a lot of the season. So really impressive prospect that I'd keep a lookout for. I'd say most likely we're talking about a number 4, number 5 defenseman at his best. But he's still got a decent skill set that I think that the Red Wings can work with. Brady Cleveland, who they added in the second round, I believe, last year. Not a big fan of him. Just wanted to highlight him because he was drafted so high. A defensive defenseman at his core. He's a player who's going to hit hard, who's going to use a stick to block shots. Really reliable defenseman in terms of getting in front of shots, but doesn't really do much with the puck. Most likely we're talking about a bottom pair defender for me. I don't really see much outside of that, but maybe he develops the offense someday. I just don't see it yet. And lastly, obviously, John Whipple, who we talked about as well, was kind of in the same mold as Cleveland, as a really reliable defensive player who takes pucks to the outside. Definitely not as physical as Brady Cleveland, but he's certainly a player I'd look out for as well. And finally, in goal, another great position for the Red Wings. Trey Augustine, who they added in last year's draft, has been absolutely lights out for both Team USA at the international level and for Michigan State in the NCAA. He was a big reason why they were able to make a deep run. He was a big reason why they were so successful. Him and Artem Levshinov were really kind of the marquee standouts on that team. But for me, really, Trey Augustine takes the cake. He was absolutely fantastic in the NCAA. Athletic, dynamic, smart, a good puck tracker, comfortable with the puck as well in terms of making breakout passes. Just really intelligent player overall. So in terms of needs for me for the Detroit Red Wings, I think they really need a top six offensive juggernaut in their pool. I think they had an opportunity to add that at 15th overall. There were a couple of prospects that I think they could have gone for. They went for Michael Brandsegg-Nygård instead, kind of stuck with the old mindset there. If they had gone a different direction with their 15th overall pick, selected, I don't know, Trevor Conley or Cole Eiserman or someone like that, I think they would have gotten an A plus. But for me, they stand at an A here for their prospect pool. Definitely top five in the NHL. Definitely a prospect pool to look out for by a decent margin. But for me, there's just that single thing lacking from their prospect pool that I think they really need, and it's a player who really has bona fide top six potential as a prospect who can be top 32 in the NHL in point scoring if he hits his ceiling. That's what's missing in their pool. But that's our second segment done. We'll get into our third here where we talk about our projections and expectations for the Detroit Red Wings and their prospects in 2024-25. But just before, a quick word from our sponsors at Game Time. If you're looking to buy cheap tickets last minute to any event, Game Time is the best place to secure them. Game Time is safe, secure, easy to use, and really reliable when it comes to getting tickets, especially last minute for events. They've got tickets up until the last minute before the event starts, and sometimes even an hour after the event starts, you can still get tickets over at Game Time. They've got a bunch of ideas to save you on tickets, whether that's flash deals or zone deals, last minute deals where you can get up to 50% off on specific tickets for specific events. They're really good at saving you money. I use Game Time all the time when it comes to going to events or going to games. With my schedule being very volatile, very changeable, I can sometimes find myself with an afternoon free, and it's always great to just scroll on Game Time, find a game that makes sense, and go to it. So overall, Game Time is really the best place to get tickets, and you can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, just create an account and redeem the code LOCKODONNHL for $20 off. So download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, so let's close things off here with our final segment about the Detroit Red Wings and their prospect pool. We'll look at their overall projections and expectations for the 2024-25 season. We'll start with the playoffs. I don't think the Red Wings make the playoffs this season. There's just too many moving parts and too many question marks. Their D-core doesn't really have a player who's established, who's taken it over. I think that if Simon Edvinsson can take over this team in terms of defensive play, him and Maurice Sider within the next 3, 4, 5 years, I think that the both of them could definitely develop a chemistry that makes a lot of sense. And to have a 6'6" player on one side and a 6'3" physical monster on the other on your top pair, it's going to work wonders for the Red Wings. I just don't think Edmondson's going to get there right away. I think within the next couple of years, you might see the Red Wings back into playoff contention, especially with the forwards that they have in their core, Dylan Larkin and those types. I think there's definitely something to work with there in terms of playoff expectations moving forward. I just don't think it's going to be this season. They might get very, very close. We're talking the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th position in the overall standings where they just missed a cut. I wouldn't be surprised at all. But I don't think this year's the year. There's just, again, a lot of competition, especially in the Eastern Conference with the amount of players that they have to face. Um, there's a lot of congestion there in the league, and I just don't think the Red Wings have it to this year, but it's going to be coming very, very soon, in my opinion. In terms of for their individual players, let's focus on Simon Edvinsson for a second, because I think every single Red Wings fan and their family is expecting him to play the entire season in the NHL, and so do I. I think that Simon Edvinsson is definitely going to play the full season in the NHL this year. For me, overall, it's just a matter of he's played a couple of games in the NHL, has looked decent, and I think this offseason is going to do wonders for his progression. As he kind of hits his kind of standard in the preseason and kind of gets up to game shape, it's going to be pretty clear that Edvinsson is a player you should probably keep around for the 2024-25 season the whole year. But I don't think he makes it in a top pair, maybe even in the second pair position. I think he's going to be playing as their number 5 defenseman and earn his way up to the second pair as the season goes on. If that's the case, I'd expect Simon Edvinsson to put up somewhere in the vicinity of 25 points, something like that, and be a player that really can, hopefully in a couple years take over this team and really become their staple on the defensive end. With Soderblom as well, Elmer Soderblom, who again was a 7th-round pick, has no business being as good as he is, but he's 6'8" and he can play fairly well with the puck. I think he's going to be spending half the season in the NHL. He's going to start off in the AHL, show that he's way too good for that league and has progressed in the ways that he needed to, and he's going to hit the NHL and have a decent season in the bottom six. So in Elmer Soderblom's case, I'd expect him to play 40 games and put up 5 goals, 10 assists, 15 points, something like that in the NHL, and essentially go a point per game in the AHL. That's my expectation and prediction for Soderblom this next season. And I think starting the season after this one, so 2025-26, I'd expect Soderblom to be a staple of the Red Wings of the Red Wings bottom six for the entire season. It's just that this season there's a progression curve. He spent basically the entire year in the AHL, so I think it's going to be something in the same vein as we saw last year, where plays for a bit, gets a call up in a game where they need to be more physical, and then they realize there's more than just physicality to his game and just keep him around. I think that's what's going to happen. Also, when it comes to Marco Kasper, Nate Danielson, and MBN, I think of those three, Marco Kasper's are most likely to play NHL games. We've already established that MBN is going to be sent over to Skellefteå in the SHL. That's already confirmed. So he's going to be playing in that league full time this next season. He's been loaned out. Nate Danielson, I'd expect to spend the year in the AHL and potentially maybe get a game or two. But I think Marco Kasper is probably going to be playing 10, 15 games to start the year in the AHL, go a point per game, and then prove that he's too good for that level and be called up for the rest of the season. I'd expect somewhere in the range of 10 goals, 15 assists, 25 points from Marco Kasper. His progression with Rögle and in the AHL so far has been really good. So I'd expect him to hit the right level at this point of his progression and make himself a full-time NHLer. The other player I want to mention is Carter Mazur. I think that he deserves a quick shout out here because his progression in the AHL so far has been great. He became a staple of his team in the NCAA and wore a letter in his last season and put up a point a game. I think there's something here, and I think that the Red Wings, especially once they hit the spot where they're kind of out of the playoff race, I think they might give him a cup of coffee, something like 5 to 10 games. My prediction is if he plays 10 NHL games, Carter Mazur is going to put up 2 goals, 2 assists, and 4 points. And then we'll see next year where he's at. But what's really key right now is to see how he's progressed in the past year. He's 6 foot, 170 pounds, so not the biggest guy, but he compensates for it really well. And I think he's got a shot at being an NHLer fairly soon, even maybe this season in terms of a cup of coffee. So yeah, if he plays 10 games, that's my prediction for him. But that's kind of a long shot, especially given the amount of options that the Red Wings have in terms of call-ups. Obviously Soderblom, Kasper, maybe even Danielson. He might make the cut, but only for a couple games. I wouldn't expect him to play any more than 10 games this next season. And if he does, that's already a great, great sign of his progression so far. And lastly, Sebastian Cossa. Costa's in a great situation right now. He played pretty much the entire year last year. Not this past year, but the one before in the ECHL. Played really well at that level, then got called up this past year to the AHL with Grand Rapids, put up a .913 save percentage. So I'd expect him to be in a similar situation as last year, this year, where he plays pretty much the entire year in the AHL. But there's a lot of injuries that can happen, a lot of rotations that can happen. My prediction, and I know it's a long shot, I think Sebastian Cossa gets into one NHL game. I think he's going to allow 3 goals, put up a sub 900 save percentage, something like that. But I think he gets into at least one game, mainly because, between Cam Talbot, Ville Husso, Alex Lyon, I think one of those 3, and maybe even 2 of those 3 will get injured. That'll just slightly open the door for Sebastian Cossa to get his taste of the NHL. And I think the Red Wings are going to be aware that, listen, we have a young team. We're not really in a contention for a playoff spot right now, so might as well give him a shot. He's going to play fairly well and then get called back down as soon as that injury's done, something like that. But that's my prediction for Sebastian Cossa, and that's our episode done. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, as always, remember to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next and what you thought of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rating review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. And make sure to tune in for our next shows as we continue our prospect coverage for the month of August. This has been Hattie Kalakesh, usually with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.